Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the ISGyP Live Journal Club for April 2024 on endometrial cancer staging and prognostic factors. My name is Ian Hagemann, co-moderating with Dr. Becca Wolsky from the University of Colorado. And I'm at WashU in St. Louis. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining this ISGyP live programming. We hope it'll be educational for you. We have a few other upcoming events for the month of April, and then a May schedule will be published. Next week will be interesting case presentations live on Zoom, and the recording will be archived on the ISGyP webpage for members. And our podcast will drop on the 24th of April, and that's about small cell carcinoma of the ovary, hypercalcemic type, and you can get that on SoundCloud. Journal Club is global. We have two different cycles in alternating months, Western and Eastern Hemisphere. Everyone is invited to attend all of these sessions. They're just timed in a way that's more convenient for residents of the different hemispheres. So this is the Western Hemisphere Journal Club. We do it the third Wednesday of each month at noon Eastern time. Then the Eastern Hemisphere goes the third Thursday of the months that they do, and it's alternating months between Eastern and Western Hemisphere. And they do it at noon Melbourne time. Our schedule for 2024, as you can see, we alternate between the Western and Eastern Hemisphere, and we have a schedule of topics. This month is April on endometrium. Next month, May, the Eastern Hemisphere group will talk about therapeutic and diagnostic biomarkers. In June, we'll come back for a special theme on AI and informatics and so on. We would love to have more volunteers to present. Our presenters are volunteers for the journal clubs and interesting case presentations. The presentations are all given by trainees and early career / new in practice pathologists. If you are such a person and you'd like to present, please email the organizer of the format that you're interested in presenting. You can see those names here and grab a screenshot, or honestly, you can reach out to anyone involved in ISGyP and we'll connect you. If you're a training program director or an attending and you have trainees whose names you would like to throw into the hat, please let us know, and we will put them on the schedule if they do agree. And we try to offer good mentoring and leading up to the presentation so that it can be an educational experience for the presenters. Okay, on to this month's main event, endometrial cancer prognosis and classification. We have three great presenters. First, we have Dr. Katerina Kearns from Temple University Hospital, who will be presenting a paper on FIGO staging. Dr. Bernadette Boac is the GYN Pathology Fellow at Cedars-Sinai, and she'll be presenting a paper on POLE cancer. And then Dr. Madhurya Ramineni is a first-year resident at Rochester, and she has a paper on isolated tumor cells to present. So these will be very interesting papers that I think will be interesting for you to hear about and then potentially go back and read. And you'll be able to watch this presentation later on in recorded form on YouTube if you need to refresh your memory as to what was said about the papers. I'd just like to give you an overview of how the Journal Club works. Our objectives are to engage trainees in gaining both scientific knowledge and the ability to critically evaluate the literature, to provide opportunities to trainees from all over the globe, and to create a leadership pipeline. The format that we use is similar to other journal clubs. We ask our presenters to focus on the study design, methods, results, discussion, and then evaluate the strengths, areas for improvement, and the potential applications of the research, including possible next steps. So in terms of today's schedule, we have the following outline. Presenters will be in the order that you heard. Each presentation will be 15 minutes. We'll handle all questions together at the end. And in the webinar format, you have a Q&A box. You have the opportunity to type questions into the Q&A box, and we'll either answer them live in real time by typing an answer in if it's something that Dr. Wolsky or I can answer, or we will have time for questions at the very end. And you can also use the chat box to greet other people and let us know where you're calling in from. That's always kind of fun. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll invite Dr. Kearns to share her screen. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to present today Journal Club, and thank you very much to ISGyP for reaching out and giving me this great opportunity. Today I am presenting an article called the 2023 FIGO Staging System for Endometrial Carcinoma Predicted Impact on Stage Distribution based on a retrospective analysis of 1,169 cases. It was published by Dr. Schilling and colleagues in the American Journal of Surgical Pathology in January 2024 in the format of the letter to the editor. A little bit on the background. As you might know, the recently published FIGO 2023 staging system for endometrial carcinoma incorporated several changes to the previous version of 2009. These changes are a reflection of the advances regarding prognostication and risk stratification. The most important differences are the introduction of non-anatomical parameters such as histological type, grade, and lymphovascular space invasion. Another big change is the subtyping of stage 1A, and that's when we see the non-anatomical parameters come to play. As we look at subtypes of stage 1A, I would like to point out the stage 1A3. FIGO 2023 introduces the separation of patients with uterine corpus and ovarian involvement into two categories. When we talk about stage 1A3, it is assigned in case of simultaneous low-grade carcinoma of the endometrium and the ovary if specific criteria are met, such as focal or no lymphovascular invasion, superficial myometrial invasion, and unilateral ovarian disease. If these criteria are not met, this would be assigned stage 3A1. We can also see that now we have an addition of stage 1C. And again, a major role is given to the histologic type of tumor. As you can see, once we encounter aggressive tumor of stage 1, it automatically gets a stage 1C if this tumor is non-invasive. However, once we see any myometrial invasion of an aggressive tumor, it becomes stage 2C. And we can also appreciate the importance of identifying the extent of lymphovascular invasion, because tumor gets upstaged to stage 2B when there is a substantial or extensive lymphovascular invasion, even if it is non-aggressive histological type. Furthermore, as molecular testing in endometrial carcinoma is encouraged, the molecular classification is also incorporated into the new staging system. When performed, the POLE-Mutated and P53 abnormal molecular groups can increase or decrease the stage of endometrial cancer in stages 1 and 2. However, no changes occur through the molecular staging in stages 3 and 4. Since molecular classification is not available worldwide and is not routinely performed everywhere, the most likely immediate impact of FIGO 2023 will be an overall change in the stage distribution of endometrial carcinomas. And therefore, the aim of the study is to precisely document the predicted impact of FIGO 2023 on stage distribution in a setting where molecular classification is not routinely performed. So for this study, a retrospective analysis was performed of all endometrial carcinomas and carcinosarcomas diagnosed in a hysterectomy specimen from the start of 2003 till the end of 2022. Total of 1,225 cases were recovered, of which 36 cases were removed due to post-neoadjuvant treatment status, and 20 due to an uncertainty of their classification, resulting in overall of 1,169 cases analyzed. If you let me talk a little bit about these 20 cases that were excluded. These cases initially were classified as low-grade endometrioid carcinomas, but after review of the available slides, assignment of an alternative diagnostic category was considered, and that would require additional ancillary studies to be performed. That's why those cases were excluded. These cases were removed due to some uncertainty about their classification as an aggressive versus a non-aggressive histotype. So each case was assigned a FIGO 2009 stage and a FIGO 2023 stage. Pathologic parameters were assigned using criteria of the 5th edition of the WHO, 2019 ISGyP Endometrial Carcinoma Project, and 2022 recommendations from the ICCR. Cases in which an endometrioid carcinoma was diagnosed in a sampling specimen, but in which no residual carcinoma was identified in hysterectomy, they were classified as FIGO 2009 stage 1A and FIGO 2023 stage 1A1. So based on the study, 82.3% of cases that were classified initially as stage 1 using FIGO 2009 system remained classified the same using FIGO 2023 system. However, 17.7% of cases classified as stage 1 using FIGO 2009 were changed to stage 2 using the FIGO 2023 system. Stage 2, 3, and 4 remained the same. The movement of a significant subset of the FIGO 2009 stage 1 cases to stage 2 was due to the latter requirement that non-aggressive histologic types with substantial LVSI and aggressive histologic types with myometrial involvement are classified as stage 2 according to FIGO 2023. The prognosis proportions of assigned stages classified with FIGO 2009 versus FIGO 2023 differed significantly for stages 1 and 2. As you can see, 76.7% versus 63.1% of all cases classified as stage 1 in FIGO 2009 versus FIGO 2023 respectively. And when we talk about the stage 2, 5.8% versus 19.4% of all cases classified as stage 2 in FIGO 2009 versus FIGO 2023 respectively. The impact of FIGO 2023 on stages 3 and 4 was negligible. So let's discuss a little bit about the results. The study shows the impact of the FIGO 2023 on stage distribution of endometrial cancers. Most notable is the reclassification of some previous stage 1 cases to stage 2 under the new system. Going forward, authors of the article say that a substantial increase in the proportion of endometrial cancers that are classified as stage 2 can be expected. They also proposed that it can be anticipated that the overall prognosis of stage 1 endometrial cancer will seem to improve and the stage 2 will seem to worsen because now stage 2 include adverse parameters such as substantial LVSI and aggressive histotypes. FIGO 2023 allows endometrial cancer to be included into the expanding group of tumors that are staged by both anatomic and non-anatomic factors, taking into the account that factors other than the extent of anatomic spread may directly influence the treatment and management. It would be important for practitioners to identify the specific staging system being applied in a pathology report to ensure that we have uniform exchange of information and we're all on the same page, clinicians and pathologists, regarding extent of disease, which will define therapeutic approaches. To talk a little bit about strengths and areas for improvement in the current study, among some of the strength of this article, first of all, I would like to emphasize that it is peer-reviewed publication, which ensures its academic scientific quality. According to the authors, all the slides and pathology reports were reviewed by the authors, which is very impressive because it is over 1,000 cases that had to be reviewed. Authors assigned pathologic parameters using consistent criteria. They used the criteria of 5th edition of WHO, the 2019 ISGyP Endometrial Carcinoma Project, and 2022 recommendations from the ICCR. I'm not sure if it's a strength or a weakness, but the article was published in the format of the letter to the editor, which might have made it more easily accessible to the readers, as the message in the letters to the editor are usually shorter and they brief compared to the full articles. To talk a little bit about areas of improvement, here I decided to put the inter-observer variability because, as we already know, the FIGO 2023 does incorporate variables that are subject to considerable inter-observer variability, such as histologic rate and lymphovascular invasion. Most resources, along with 2023 FIGO, do not clarify whether LVSI is counted in a single tissue section or cumulative across all tissue sections. It is not clear how LVSI evaluation was performed upon review of all the slides during this study. Molecular stage wasn't addressed to better understand the stage migration. As I said before, polymutated and P53 abnormal molecular groups can increase or decrease the stage of endometrial cancer in stages 1 and 2. Therefore, it would be worthwhile to see the full impact of the new staging system, including also the molecular data. But it is understandable that performing a molecular study on such a large cohort of cases can be problematic. Hardest cases were excluded. Those 20 cases that I described before, they were excluded. Not sure if it would impact the result of the study, but it would be interesting to see if they showed any changes at all to the results. Also, another point is that authors suggest that it can be anticipated that the overall prognosis of stage 2 will seem to worsen due to inclusion of adverse parameters, such as substantial LVSI and aggressive histotypes. However, the statement would require long-term studies probably to see, and also on a large cohorts of patients to see the actual impact of the assignment to the stage 2. And I also would like to conclude a little bit here and to cite another great article that was written by Dr. McCluggage and colleagues. In this paper, they talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the FIGO 2023 in general, and that's why I decided to include it in my presentation as well. In the article, they acknowledge that the new system allows us to pay attention to other parameters of endometrial carcinoma, which are important for management and prognostication, and they should be incorporated in the diagnostic algorithm. However, it is still debatable whether the stage should be an element of patient risk stratification or become the risk model itself by incorporating all these factors beyond anatomic extent. Among the disadvantages of the new system, authors say that the FIGO 2023 system is markedly different and perhaps more complicated than the prior version, which is likely to hinder its adoption, translation, and generalization. It has an increase from 9 substages to 21, and it lacks pathology consensus and agreement on some of its sections. The FIGO 2023 incorporates variables that are subject to considerable inter-observer variability, as I said before, such as grade, quantification of LVSI, what is substantial LVSI, and what is the approach to properly count it. FIGO 2023 has also insufficient pathology representation, as only a single pathologist was a part of the committee. The absence of inclusion of larger number of pathologists as well as pathology societies is a major oversight in update development, discussion, and publication, and it may also affect efforts to implement the system into practice. As far as future applications of the new system, of course, a healthy dialogue is warranted before adoption and implementation of the new system. In Dr. Schilling's study, we can appreciate what a significant impact on staging it has. It is possible to retain some of the FIGO 2009 and supplement it with prognostic data points when applicable. We have to keep in mind that staging systems are employed worldwide, and not everywhere molecular testing is performed routinely, and not everywhere it's accessible. The lack of substantial representation of the pathology community is a major deficiency. Staging systems rely heavily on pathology parameters and what we say. Therefore, the pathology community should be largely engaged in guiding insignificant changes such as these. The new FIGO should be evaluated at a bigger level, at a multi-institutional and global level. Everything in one basket approach may create significant gaps in cancer care between resource-rich and resource-poor healthcare systems, deviating from the goal of personalized medicine. And thank you very much for your attention. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Please do feel free to type any questions into the Q&A box. We will address them. And meanwhile, Dr. Boac, if you would share your screen, we can get going with your presentation.
Okay, so good morning. My name is Bernadette Boac, and I am the Gyn, Placental, and Perinatal Pathology Fellow at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. And I would like to say thank you for inviting me for this presentation, and also great job to Dr. Kearns for such a great presentation, which I will be building upon slightly today. So, and it's not progressing. There you go. Okay, so today I'll be presenting the manuscript entitled The Significance of International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics Grading and Microsatellite Instability-High and POLE-Mutant Endometrial Carcinoma by the authors listed below. This was a collaboration between Memorial Sloan Kettering and Cornell Medical College. So we have used the Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics Grading System, otherwise known as FIGO, since 1988. Clinically, they use this grading system when considering the disease progression and survival outcome for patients. In 2013, the Cancer Genome Atlas, or TCGA, identified 4 genomic categories for endometrioid carcinoma, including the ultramutated polymerase epsilon, also known as the POLE-Mutant, the microsatellite instability-high, or MSI-high, which is derived from the defects in the mismatch repair mechanism. The third category is copy number high, which predominantly correlates with serous or serous-like tumors. And lastly, copy number low, and is what many of us know as no specific molecular profile. In this study, they aim to determine the role that molecular plays in classifying endometrioid carcinoma. So the question becomes, how do we incorporate these categories into FIGO grading? Because from previous studies, we know that the POLE-Mutant tumors have a favorable prognosis, the copy number high tumors have the poorest outcomes, and the MSI high and copy number low tumors kind of fall within the spectrum with a more intermediate risk. So categorizing these tumors into one of the 3 FIGO grades is not as simple as it seems, which brings up the question, should these mutations actually change clinical management? This article focuses specifically on the POLE and the MSI high tumors. So the authors selected all endometrioid endometrial carcinomas that underwent next-gen sequencing at their institution. They further limited it to only cases that had MSI high or POLE mutations, in addition to resection specimens that were reviewed in-house. They also excluded any carcinomas with a mixed histologic feature. They used the traditional 3-tier FIGO grading system, which classified FIGO 1 as less than 5% solid component, grade 2 as 5 to 50%, and grade 3 as greater than 50%. They also assigned a binary grade using low and high grade. So cases originally classified as FIGO grades 1 or 2 were categorized as low grade and FIGO grade 3 as high grade. They then reviewed the MMRP immunohistochemistry performed on the initial workup, which acted as a surrogate for detecting the MSI high tumors. Molecular analysis using NGS with a 468 gene panel was completed. They were specifically looking for those with the somatic mutations in the polyexonuclease domain. Additional analysis for the tumor MSI status was completed using a bioinformatics tool. Anything with a score of 10 or greater was classified as MSI high. They also checked the MLH1 promoter hypermethylation status for those with a loss on immunostain. And then here's a wide array of the statistical analysis that they completed. So moving on to the results, there were originally 53 POLE-mutant cases. However, 3 were removed as they were POLE variants that were not previously described as pathogenic. So that left 50 POLE-mutant cases and 162 MSI high cases included in their analysis. Looking at a breakdown of the clinical pathologic features of the MSI high versus the POLE-mutated tumors, we can see that within the MSI high cohort, most were high grade and higher stage, reaching statistical significance. And then within the POLE-mutant cohort, the tumors were mostly low stage, but span all 3 FIGO grades. So now we'll take a look at the patient outcomes. So in looking at the progression-free and disease-specific survival graphs for both MSI-High, which has been highlighted in yellow, and then the POLE-mutated cases, they found that the POLE-mutant tumors have had significantly better survival. But when we look at the remaining 4 graphs, which compares the grade groups, there was no statistical difference in either the progression-free or disease-specific survival. It was the same result when they reran this analysis using the binary grading system as well. They performed a multivariable analysis on the MSI-High cohort and found that both the recurrence and disease-specific survival were independent of other factors. This data was based off of 76 patients that had recurrent disease and 22 patients that died of disease. They were unable to complete the same analysis for the POLE group due to the limited number of cases. However, for the POLE-mutant tumors, they did look at the 8 patients with recurrent disease and further broke down which protein was altered. As you can see, they had variable results for the MSI status, as well as IHC expression for MMR and P53. Another point taken into consideration was that per clinical guidelines, a greater proportion of those high-grade tumors received adjuvant therapy. However, it did not appear to significantly change progression-free or disease-specific survival in the MSI-High group. Although they were not able to do the same analysis for the POLE group, they did note that 66% of those patients did receive adjuvant therapy. So going back to the questions brought up during the study design, let's start with FIGO grading. We have used it for many years, and it is incorporated into not only risk stratification models, but also taken into account for therapy guidelines. However, with that in mind, we have to remember the system is not perfect and there's inter-observer variability when determining a grade. Sometimes that solid component looks more like 45%, and then all of a sudden that squamous area looks larger on a deeper level. Although it may not be a perfect system, it still has value. But as in recent studies, including this one, have shown, molecular studies are taking the stance in predicting outcomes as well. The PORTEC-3 trial showed that molecular classification can help predict therapy response for high-risk endometrial carcinomas. A paper put out by Leon Castillo does mention that the prognosis of POLE-mutant cases was independent of adjuvant treatment, and therefore, we may spare these patients the additional therapy. This current study also analyzed the outcomes for patients with MSI-High and POLE-mutant tumors. And again, they confirmed that the POLE-mutant tumors were associated with a statistically significant better progression-free and disease-specific survival. However, this study did report a higher recurrence rate of 15% in the POLE-mutant cohort than previously reported, which was up to 6% in Leon Castillo's manuscript. The authors also bring up the discordant IHC and molecular testing for MMRP. After a review of the IHC slides, those cases showed a loss, which was either geographic or focal, suggesting a subclonal process. Therefore, they state it is still important to complete molecular testing when histologic or clinical suspicion is high. A question they attempt to address was which comes first, the POLE mutation or the MMR defect. Some studies, such as the one pictured here, states that signatures can exhibit non-additive properties and may be unique profiles. In this current paper, they bring up the possibility of a shift in the mutational process when there is a recurrence or metastasis, and they refer to the Charles Ashley manuscript. So it seems we still do not have a clear-cut answer here. Lastly, the list of POLE variants continues to grow, so we need to determine which should be defined as pathogenic POLE mutations. And I wanted to show this table from Leon Castillo's paper, not to actually go over the different POLE variants, but just to show a comprehensive list of those discovered so far. As you can see, there's also a lot of work to be done here. So overall, this was a well-planned out and strong study. They had great resources and access to a good volume of cases. Since this was a single institution, they were able to minimize variability amongst the gynecologic pathologists and hold biweekly meetings to keep a uniform diagnostic approach. It was also helpful that they incorporated both the 3-tier FIGO system as well as the binary grading system, because it is a topic that often comes up at conferences and journal clubs. I think there are some options to build upon and improve this study as well. As they mentioned during the results section, the POLE cohort was limited to the number of events. It would be beneficial to increase the study size not only within the institution, but also to include multiple centers. I understand it would take additional work to keep the integrity of the study at the same level, but it is necessary to analyze a larger pool of tumors, including those first presenting with disease rather than as referrals for recurrences, which the authors do mention could be a bias as to why they have a higher recurrence rate than previous reports. Also, they could expand and validate the pathogenicity of the novel variants of the POLE-mutant variants. And it would be good to know what kind of therapy these patients received and then stratify which recurrences which patients had recurrences based on treatment. They don't clarify if these patients received adjuvant therapy before or after testing for the POLE mutation, but it has been reported that POLE-Mutant and the MSI-high tumors do not actually respond well to platinum-based therapies. As in any study, increasing the surveillance time would be great, but we know it's not always possible as patients are lost to follow-up for many different reasons. And a few points for clarification that were not mentioned are, what was the time frame of this study? And maybe the next step is to make sure it's a prospective data collection. Also, the ancillary testing methodology was not clear. It seems like the MMRP slides were reviewed, but were any of the stains repeated in-house, specifically thinking about the discordant cases, or were the interpretations all completed on outside stains? As far as application, the main question remains, should FIGO grading be omitted in MSI-high and POLE cases, since it doesn't appear to be applicable to the prognosis of these tumors? However, does it really hurt to still include FIGO grading in our reports? We'll have to see how each institution addresses these changes. Thank you. Good. And I'll take questions at the end as well.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Boac. We'll let you stop sharing your screen, and Dr. Ramineni can bring up her screen for the third paper.
Hello, everyone. I'm Madhurya. I'm a first-year pathology resident from University of Rochester Medical Center. And it's my pleasure to be presenting this journal club. I would like to thank ISGyP for the opportunity. So the manuscript that I will be presenting today is published in the International Journal of Gynecological Cancer as an original article by Cucinella et al. It is titled Prognostic Value of Isolated Tumor Cells in Sentinel Lymph Nodes in Low-Risk Endometrial Cancer, Results from an International Multi-Institutional Study. A little bit of introduction about the current standard of care for endometrial cancer. So currently it is hysterectomy with pelvic, with or without para-aortic lymphadenectomy. So sentinel lymph node mapping emerged as an alternative method, especially for low-risk endometrial cancers. And the main objective for this is to identify lymph nodes that are more at risk of metastasis. And this method is sensitive for detecting low-volume metastasis that includes micromets and isolated tumor cells. And the other main goal for bringing up this method is to limit the lymphadenectomy procedures because they're associated with a lot of morbidities to the patient. The sentinel lymph nodes are handled in the pathology lab by a different method from the routine procedure. It's called ultrastaging, which basically includes taking multiple serial sections and cutting multiple levels, also including IHCs to detect micrometastasis, which is defined as any tumor deposit that occupies greater than 0.2 to less than 2 mm. So the micrometastasis is included in the FIGO staging, and it is designated as 3C1I or 3C2I, depending on whether it involves the pelvic or para-aortic lymph nodes. The other thing that ultrastaging can identify is isolated tumor cells, which is defined as any metastatic deposit that occupies less than 0.2 mm. Currently, this does not change the FIGO stage. However, the AJCC 8th edition designated the isolated tumor cells as PM0I+. Currently, the prognosis for ITCs is unclear. A little bit of background about isolated tumor cells. So from the NCCN guidelines, we know that majority of the patients with ITCs till date have received adjuvant therapy. Because they already received adjuvant therapy, we don't know what is their exact risk of recurrence. We also don't know if they really need adjuvant therapy. And we don't know what is their prognosis compared to the patients who are node negative on sentinel lymph node mapping. Especially to answer the third question, we need studies that need to come up with two groups of patients, two groups of cohorts, one with ITCs and one group who are node negative. And basically, they have to be comparable in terms of their risk profile by adjusting all other risk factors. And we have to ensure that they don't receive any adjuvant treatment, because that is something we need to determine if they need adjuvant therapy or not. And then after ensuring that they have comparable risk profiles, that's when we can find a clear answer about is there any real prognostic difference between these two groups. So far, in the literature, the studies about ITCs could not come up with this perfect cohorts of patients, and that's why we don't have a clear answer about what their exact prognostic impact is. So in that regards, the current study is right on the point, and they managed to come up with two perfect groups of patients, one who are SLN-ITC positive, and the other group who are node negative on sentinel lymph node mapping. And it's interesting to note that both these groups of patients were matched for all the risk factors, and they are all early stage endometrioid cancer patients with a low risk profile that's comparable between these two groups. Coming to their methods, it's a multi-institutional international retrospective cohort study. As I mentioned before, they included only FIGO stage 1A endometrial cancer patients with low risk features like grade 1 or 2 endometrioid histology. And none of their patients received adjuvant treatment so that they could compare the need for adjuvant treatment between these two groups. So this is a diagram that illustrates their study design. So basically they have two groups of patients. One is SLN negative, which includes 452 patients recruited. All of them were recruited from Mayo Clinic. And the next group with SLN-ITCs are 42 in number, and they are recruited from all over the world. So this is a list of all the exclusion factors that they applied. I will not read the entire list, but basically any factor that puts the patient into a high-risk category is excluded. For example, having a high-grade histology greater than 50% myometrial invasion or cervical stromal invasion, and so on. All of them were excluded. Coming to the results, this is a table comparing various clinical-pathological characteristics between the two patient cohorts. As you can see, none of these baseline characteristics differed significantly between, none of these baseline characteristics they do not have significant difference between the two cohorts, except for the presence or absence of lymphovascular invasion, which is significantly high in the SLN-ITC cohort and is expected to be. This is a table for the univariate analysis for the predictors of recurrence. So the outcomes are of two types. One is any recurrence and the other is non-vaginal recurrence. As you can see, node status, tumor grade, and lymphovascular invasion are significant predictors of recurrence and non-vaginal recurrence. And one thing to note is this is a univariate analysis, so no subset analysis was done in this table. And the p-values are significant. So they're all significant predictors of these outcomes. Excuse me. So these are Kaplan-Meier curves for recurrence-free survival between the node negative. As you can see, the SLN-ITC patients have worse recurrence-free survival than node-negative patients. And the study did a subset analysis by excluding patients with LVI because lymphovascular invasion itself is associated with recurrence. So they excluded that and did a comparison of recurrence-free survival between the two cohorts. So in the whole population and in the population after exclusion of LVI, the SLN-ITC cohort had worse recurrence-free survival. But as you can see, the p-value is not significant. Similarly, SLN-ITC cohort had worse non-vaginal recurrence-free survival in the whole population and also after excluding LVI, and also the p-value is significant. There is no significant difference in overall survival between the cohorts before and after excluding LVI. So this is a table this is basically an adjusted model of predicting recurrence after excluding patients with LBSI. So in the previous table, we saw that on univariate analysis, SLN-ITC the patients had worse recurrence. So here they tried predicting the recurrence to any recurrence and non-vaginal recurrence after excluding LVI. As you can see for ITCs, the hazard ratio for having a recurrence is not significant, and the 95% confidence interval includes 1. But one thing to note is the hazard ratio for having a recurrence in SLN ITC patients is almost comparable to the hazard ratio of having a recurrence for grade 2. And the other thing to note here is for non-vaginal recurrence, after excluding LVSI, the SLN ITC patients have a significant hazard ratio with a significant p-value. Coming to the discussion, so the study summarized their results and compared them with that of the existing literature. So we have seen that SLN ITC patients had worse recurrence-free survival compared to the node-negative patients with low-risk endometrial cancer. Even after excluding those with LVI, the recurrence-free survival is significant. So this is in contrast to the previous literature, which reported none or few recurrences. This could be because of the of a smaller sample size in the previous studies. As we know, it's difficult to find patients with ITCs because ultra-staging and sentinel lymph node sampling increases the ability to detect these ITCs. So they are fairly recent methods, and the previous studies may not have had enough number of ITC patients to detect a significant number of recurrences. And it's worth mentioning that the current study is the highest number of, has the highest number of ITC patients, which is 42, and it's the highest number so far. There is no significant difference in overall survival for the whole population, and after excluding LVI, this finding is in sync with the previous studies. So coming to the strengths, as I already mentioned, the study has the largest cohort of patients with ITCs to date. They have recruited 42 patients with ITCs from all over the world. And the study followed a strict inclusion criteria to make the patient cohorts more comparable in terms of their risk profile. They only identified low-risk patients who have not received any adjuvant treatment. So the study largely minimized the confounding effects of treatment. And this is the only study to exclusively compare SLN ITC patients with node-negative patients with a similar risk profile. There are some limitations to the study. It being a retrospective study, the authors think that they could not standardize follow-up for the patients. They also have a small and unbalanced sample size because they have 452 patients in the SLN node-negative group, whereas there are only 42 patients in the ITC group. It's still the highest till date, but it's an unbalanced sample size. And they did not apply any correction methods for multiple hypothesis testing. They acknowledge that their duration of follow-up is limited. And the ITC patients were recruited from all over the world. So there is lack of centralized pathology review, and the protocol for ultra-staging was not uniform across all the participating centers. And then in their methodology, they did not mention what was the ultra-staging protocol that was followed. So this leaves us with some unanswered questions. So despite ITCs being associated with more risk of recurrence, we still don't know the need for adjuvant treatment in this group of patients. And we have seen that LVI is frequently present in the SLN ITC cohort, but whether the association between LVI and ITCs, is it clinically significant, or does it just represent the spread pathway of ITCs, is still unaddressed. So that leads to some implications and future questions for future research. So the authors think that they need to standardize follow-up for this subset of patients with SLN ITCs and low-risk profile. So they basically think that they need to follow them up closely to accurately determine their prognostic impact and need for adjuvant therapy. So that's the reason why the same group is designing another prospective study so that they can follow up the patients more closely. And despite the results, the management of these patients with ITCs still remains controversial. So they think that adding molecular tumor profiling to clinical-pathological factors like ITCs can further refine the risk stratification in the group of patients with, especially with low-grade endometrial cancer. So I would like to conclude that the results of the current study represent preliminary data on this specific population of low-risk endometrial cancer patients who have ITCs on the sentinel lymph node mapping and who did not receive any adjuvant therapy. With the current results, they could not draw any definitive conclusions regarding the best treatment strategy for these patients. And the authors think that it requires additional prospective studies to be conducted in this subset of patients focusing on this particular group to arrive at more definitive answers. Thank you everyone for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the presentations, all three of you, and I especially appreciate, as a moderator, I appreciate that everyone stayed nicely on time, which gives us a few minutes for a question and answer session. We do have one question for Dr. Madhurya Ramineni in the question box about what is your protocol for detecting ITCs is the question. Now, you mentioned that the authors didn't necessarily give the protocol that they used or didn't harmonize it. Do you have any comments about what the protocols did resemble, or if not, about what protocol you use in your institution?
Sure. So I don't think we do ultrastaging in our institution. I've not come across sentinel lymph node mapping being done in our institution, but I may be wrong since I'm only a first-year resident. I may not have seen enough cases, but definitely in the study, because their patients with ITCs were recruited from all over the world, and they mentioned that they did not do any centralized review, and what's the most commonly followed ultrastaging protocol is not mentioned.
Probably too many to count. Yeah, very good. Katerina, since, kind of similar question about your paper, FIGO 2023 staging, are you reporting it in your institution currently?
So we are still not on the FIGO 2023 path, if I would say that. We still use the GCC guidelines while we report. When we do meet with our colleagues from the Gyn-Onc, they do try to sum it up and put kind of like basically giving it a several stage version, and then try to decide on the further treatment based on that information. But so far, it's not mandatory for pathologists to report the FIGO 2023.
I agree. I think that would be the most common answer if we were to take a poll, which we are in fact doing.
That's the same for us at University of Colorado.
Bernadette, I have a question for you from your presentation. The POLE tumors typically have a high-grade morphology. I was interested to see that in table 2 of your paper, the authors report that less than half of their POLE tumors had a high-grade morphology. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that, or if they had discussed it.
They actually did not discuss it. They just outright said that it did cover all 3 FIGO grades. But they did, slightly mention that they tend to be higher grade tumors, at least on morphology. But yet, when we look at the table, it's 16 in grade 1, 8 in grade 2, and then 18 in grade 3. So it's almost split more between grade 1 and 3, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. The one thing I actually had a question about this one, though, is I wonder if they knew initially that these were POLE-mutated before they decided to grade, or if this was like done after the fact too, because that was not exactly clear in the manuscript. But there's definitely some things for us to look at here.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything else from the audience? If not, I think we can wrap this session up. I want to thank all three of you for presenting. We're getting some applause from the audience reactions. Thank you to everyone for attending this session. I hope it was informative. And just as a reminder, if you'd like to present or if you know someone who would, just get in touch with us. So thank you very much and have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks all. You all
Thank
did
you.
great.